You are about to discover the most destructive sin of the modern era, not because it screams, but because it whispers, not because it hurts outside, but because it erodes inside. This is the silent worship of self, satisfaction, the disguised devotion to shallow pleasure that has millions of men under the name of freedom. I am Laerty, and in this channel, Gods of Semen, you will be led by a spiritual and scientific journey that goes far beyond seminal retention. It is about restoring what was stolen from you, the invisible force that made you king, priest, leader. What you will hear now is part of an ongoing spiritual war, a minefield where apathy, anxiety, addiction, and confusion have kept men away from their manly essence, far from their eternal purpose. But this video is a rite of passage, a sacred call. Stay until the end and receive the hidden keys that will rekindle your focus, purify your energy, and start a reconstruction that few have the courage to live. If you feel that there is something wrong with this world and what has been done with the male soul, subscribe now on the channel and activate the bell here. Each teaching is part of an initiatory journey that can seal your new identity. Our mission is to wake up 25,000 men to this forgotten truth, and you are not watching by chance. You are part of this spiritual revolution. There is a sin that does not appear in modern sacred books, is not pointed out in the pulpits, and much less reprimanded by society. On the contrary, it is sold, promoted, normalized, a spiritual poison that drives through the screens, which disguises themselves as freedom, which hides behind the word pleasure. It is not just masturbation. It is something deeper, more sneaky. It is the silent worship of self, satisfaction. It is the idolatry of their own pleasure above discipline, mission, transcendence. It is present when man exchanges his spiritual vigil for infinite roll on his cell phone, when it exchanges the pain of growth for false safety of entertainment. It is the habit disguised as normal, but it steals the soul in slow doses. This silent sin does not seem dangerous at first because it masks with beautiful words. It is called self-love, when in fact, it is escape. They sell as sexual freedom what deep down is hormonal prison. They label stress relief a vicious cycle that only increases emptiness. The modern man thinks he is taking care when he is destroying himself. Culture says it is evolving when it is being unmasked, weakened, dopaminated. He feels immediate pleasure but does not realize that he is draining his invisible power, erasing his inner flame. And the symptoms of this spiritual fall are soon to appear. First comes the loss of direction. He wakes up and no longer knows why to get up. Then a heavy, almost nameless demotivation that makes it all seem useless. The look weakens, loses shine. He begins to look for endless distractions. Excess food, pornography, games, series. Nothing fully satisfies him. He feels disconnected, but does not understand why. It attracts confusion, unstable women, chaotic environments. The vital energy that should be used to build, protect, and lead is being wasted, night after night. And why are almost all men stuck in this? Because the system was designed for this. Since youth, we have been bombarded with images, stimuli, and ideologies that celebrate instant pleasure. Pornography is everywhere, and not just the obvious. It is in advertisements, in networks, in easy clicks. Dopamine is manipulated as puppet, and the worst, we have no more masters. There are no men spiritually awakened guiding the younger ones. The priests silenced. The parents are addicted. The teachers are blind. The modern man walks without direction because he was taught to live disconnected from above and dipped in low vibration addictions. This sin does not present itself with horns or fire. He comes in silence, with easy pleasure, with promises of freedom. But when it enters, it starts eroding inside, steals the brightness, the strength, the presence, and transforms lions into domesticated lambs by the hand itself. When a man surrenders to the worship of shallow pleasure, he is not just hurting his discipline, he is disconnecting from the source. Seminal retention is not any practice. It is a spiritual covenant. Each energy fall causes a change in man's vibrational frequency. He begins to vibrate in scarcity, fear, insecurity, and like a magnet, it attracts everything that suits this lower vibration. Toxic relationships, empty opportunities, conflict environments. Her energy no longer protects. She escapes. And the man, who could once be a spiritual rock, becomes vulnerable as dust in the wind. This vibrational fall is not only perceived in external events, It begins in internal perception. Sensual addiction, be it pornography, masturbation, or mental fantasies, creates a mist in the mind. Man no longer knows what purpose is and what is distraction. He thinks he is choosing, but is being guided by conditioned impulses. The mind becomes a battlefield in which truth and illusion are confused. He loses the spiritual sage, no longer feels when it is on the wrong way. The silence intuition. The soul does not respond. The sensitivity to the sacred disappears as if it had never existed. And so, gradually, man disconnects himself from his male mission. He even tries to seek meaning, but without vital energy, everything crumbles. Forget about the votes you made to yourself. Abandon projects. Advance commitments. Exchanges silence for noise. Vision for distraction. Firmness for hesitation. A man without channeled sexual energy is like a temple without an altar. It may seem structured on the outside, but inside it is empty. He no longer leads. It no longer protects. It no longer offers transformative presence. And the world in his darkness feels the absence of this awakening man, and continues to sink him into more stimuli, more addictions, more oblivion. The sin of unbridled self, assumption, not only takes the energy, it closes the portal. And a man disconnected from the source is no longer a channel of the sacred. It no longer receives visions, inspirations, divine strength. It becomes a piece of the system, a number, a servant of matter. Spiritual war is not made with swords, but with silent choices. And the main battlefield is the body of man himself. There is a point where man wakes up, a silent but definitive moment when he looks in the mirror and is ashamed of those who became. It is at this moment that the rupture begins. By breaking the self-sabotage cycle, man experiences what many have never known, the return of spiritual hunger. He begins to feel thirsty for purpose, hunger for overcoming. I wish for silence, reading, movement, prayer. Each cell of the body begins to cry out by discipline, for truth, for growth. He no longer escapes pain. He turns it into an altar. The same impulse that once brought him into sin now pushes him toward the sacred. This internal transformation begins to manifest itself in the body. The face redefines. The skin gains a firm shine. The look, once vague, penetrates again as a blade. The posture changes. He is no longer bent by addiction. He steps firmly, as one who carries an ancestral mission. Biology responds hard. Testosterone rises. The immune system strengthens. Magnetism intensifies. Women feel, not for a superficial charm, but for an invisible field emanating from integrity. The men around you realize, even without understanding. They respect, feel, silence before their presence. This spiritual magnetism does not require effort. It does not come from ready-made sentences or seduction. He springs from the inside, from the purity of those who dominated his instincts and put his energy at the service from above. The surrounding atmosphere changes because man is no longer an empty receptacle. He became a channel of courage, vision, of firmness, eternal channel. Where he step, there is order. Where he speaks, there is a silence attentive. He is again the one who inspires, not for techniques, but for essence. And his life, which once revolved around fleeting pleasures, now becomes ritual, a living offering to the sacred male forgotten by this world. This is the true rebirth of masculinity, not something performative or superficial, but a state of presence that transforms everything around. The man is again altar. It is fire again. It is the spiritual pillar that supports your home, your lineage, your mission. Breaking with sin does not happen with theories. True transformation begins the day man makes an irreversible decision, a point without return, an internal decree where he says, enough. This is the day of inner rupture. No matter how many times have fallen, no matter how embarrassed it is, when man declares with all his soul that he will never be a servant of shallow pleasure, the spirit world hears. Something departs, something breaks down. The invisible chain that held it begins to crumble. And from that moment, the path requires firmness, but also delivers. Liberation is not only sustained with willpower, it is necessary to create spiritual pacts with the top. The man who wants to cut sin needs to seal new votes with the invisible world. It can be a fast, a vow of silence, a daily commitment to prayer, the consecration of sexual energy to an eternal purpose. Each ritual is an anchor that protects the decision. This is not a religion. It is reconnecting with the sacred forces that inhabit inside and outside man. When the energy is dedicated to the top, it purifies itself. When pleasure is placed in the background, the mission takes the throne. In this process, a new identity begins to be born, and this time, it is not shaped by media, addictions, or external opinions. It springs from silence, from transformed pain, from fidelity to invisible. Masculinity is no longer a performance and becomes a rock, no more eager for validation but rooted in purpose. The man no longer needs to prove who he is, he just lives what he is. With each straight choice, with every renunciation of shallow pleasure, your soul strengthens itself. It becomes a walking spiritual fortress, a temple in living flesh. And in this state, it will never be the same, because now he remembers who he is. And a man who remembers does not return to darkness. There is an ancestral code that has been silenced for centuries, now revealed in the ebook Stored Sex, the code of raw male energy, an initiatic work with over 170 pages that decodes the true power of man through seminal retention. Divided into 8 deep modules, this book delivers activation phrases, spiritual practices, energy rituals, and forgotten structures that restore internal fire, mental clarity, and the spiritual presence of a conscious man. Each word was written as a blade to cut addiction, apathy, and male domestication. If you are ready to live with purpose, magnetism, and steering, click on the link in the description or comment fixed and start your transformation. Bonus: the first 10 who enter this path will receive an exclusive promotion, a call reserved only to those who act urgently and honor. The man is not falling alone, he is being pushed. There is an engineering behind the male fall, and it begins with distraction. Social networks were not just created to connect people, but to disconnect the man from himself. Everything is designed to hold your attention. Notifications, short videos, addictive algorithms. Modern entertainment does not feed the soul, it anesthesia. And at the center of everything, pornography presents itself as an exhaust valve, but it acts as an invisible collar. These platforms are not neutral. They form an ecosystem that undermines their presence, focus, and vital energy, replacing depth with stimulus and purpose with pleasure. Behind this distraction, there is a market, and this market profits from your weakness. The industry not only tolerates your spiritual fall, it depends on it. The weaker you are, the more consumes. Products for anxiety, self-help, services without soul, addictions disguised as comfort, therapies that treat symptoms without cure the root. Every relapse of yours is capitalized. The system converts your pain into data, your desire to recipe, your loneliness in dependence. There is no interest in your liberation. There is interest in your repetition, because addicted, distracted, and empty men are easy to control, and even more, easy to explore. But there is a detail that few realize. While this happens with the mass, the spiritual elite does the opposite. Hidden orders, old strains, discrete societies. They know the value of sexual energy. They preserve it as a source of power, discipline, and spiritual clarity. As they push others to the abyss of instant pleasure, they keep the secrets of retention, transmutation, inner silence. They do not share it publicly. On the contrary, they make it look crazy, mock chastity, ridicule purity. But behind the curtains, live with containment rituals, votes of strategic celibacy, hormonal fasts. They know what you don't know yet, that the man who keeps his seed becomes dangerous, becomes awake, it becomes incapable. And that's why everything around you has been designed to keep you from discovering that. Because the day you stop feeding these systems, it will be like cutting the wire of a silent bomb. Chaos will try to pull you back, but right now, you will no longer be an ordinary consumer. It will be a man at war, in reconstruction, and finally, rising. When man decides to get up, the spirit world not only observes, he responds, and often the answer comes in disguise. A woman appears, lovely, mysterious, engaging. Precisely the moment man begins to restore his energy, seduction emerges as an invitation. But behind what looks like connection, there is a trial. For not every woman who enters the life of a rising man comes as blessing. Some come as a test. They arrive at the right time, or rather at the critical moment. The energy he began to accumulate attracts glances, intentions, desires. But if the man is still fragile, he confuses seduction with destination, and it falls again, only now with a more sophisticated justification. There are women who don't even know what they are doing, but they feel. They perceive the light by vibrating in the field of a man in retention. They feel the invisible heat of their presence. They are attracted not by the body, but by the silent force it radiates. They approach with intensity, seek contact, want connection, but they do not know the cost of this. They do not understand that this energy is sacred. That is not something to suck unconsciously. And if the man is not awake, it can drain everything, not out of evil, but by unconscious spiritual hunger. Therefore, man needs to discern. Not every woman who wants you is ready to accompany you. And then the deepest archetype arises, that of living proof. The woman who is not just someone, she is a mirror, a symbol, a portal. It can be a prison or a bridge. It may be the key that raises you, or the cell that holds you, and it's up to you to decipher. The feminine, in its most archetypal form, is not just there as a company, but as a puzzle. The right woman only reveals herself when you are whole, when you no longer seek, when you don't need to. And the others arise before that, as tests from above, as challenges to your vote, as shadows of your own desire. The question is not to avoid women, it is deciphering what each one represents. If you fail, you return to the cycle. If you resist, advance to the next level. For the sacred feminine is not an enemy, but the man who is not dominated will always be dominated by him. And until he becomes lord of himself, he will continue to confuse trial with passion, and learning in the most painful way that not all beauty was made to be touched. Some have been made to reveal if you are worthy of what you are about to receive. The man who enters the way of seminal retention is not just moving away from a habit, he is declaring war. And this war is not against the visible world. It is against subtle, invisible, silent forces. The man's energy field in retention begins to shine more intensely, and the more light, the more it becomes targeted. Spiritual attacks are not necessarily mystical events. They are unclean thoughts that come out of nowhere, strange impulses that seem to have no origin, emotions that sprout for no reason. These are invisible arrows fired at the wall of your mind. These are temptations built to look like yours, when they are actually invasions. From the moment you begin to retain, the battlefield intensifies. Why do you feel more temptations right after a few days of purity? Because the light begins to bother. The accumulated energy begins to change your vibration, and this causes an immediate spiritual reaction. The forces that feeded on your fall began to observe you with restlessness. They send thoughts, memories, desires, not because you are weak, but because it started to get strong. And at this point, many confuse this storm with a sign of failure, when it is actually an indicative of advancement. To remain firm in this invisible warfare, man needs to protect his energy territory as a king protects his castle. This is not only done with positive thoughts or willpower. Spiritual strategy is required. Daily rituals, protective decrees, sacred readings that shield the mind, psalms recited in a firm voice that seal the field around, fasts that tune the spiritual senses. The body needs to become a temple. The routine needs to become a shield. The discipline needs to become a sword. Every decision is a built wall or an open gate. You choose. The position of your body, the music you hear, the videos you consume, the words you pronounce, all make codes. Everything strengthens or weakens the field. There is no neutrality in the spirit world. Either you are sacred territory or busy land. And in the end, the man who wins this invisible war is not the most perfect. He is the most vigilant. He who understands that evil does not need an invitation, just a breach. The one who, even attempted, remains standing. Because you know that the enemy doesn't just want its fall, wants your withdrawal. And when you don't give up, he loses. Alchemy of the Gods is not just a book. It is a portal of spiritual activation, forged for men who feel the call to return to its divine origin through seminal retention. The Kundalini serpentine fire, the sacred oil that awakens the mind, and the liberation of the internal prisons that maintain it enslaved to the material world. This initiatory work reveals hidden codes with ritualistic depth and symbolic language, accessible to all searchers in physical, digital, and audiobook formats, so that no man is without access to his spiritual reconstruction. If you are looking for more than information, seeking initiation, ascension, true, now go to the description or fixed comment and receive this reconnection key with its original essence. But first of all, I have a novelty that you did not expect. SEMEN has just been launched, the Retained Success Path. an audiobook with more than 2 hours of structured teachings on the 6 most transforming pillars of seminal retention: focus, energy, magnetism, purpose, spiritual discipline, and internal reconstruction. Directly, ritualistic, and deeply practical. By purchasing audiobook today, you still get 30% off the ebook The Art of Semen Retention for Men, with more than 20 pages that deliver direct practices to arouse your spiritual strength, align your emotions, and walk with high purpose. And if you feel that this mission is also yours, become a member of the Gods of Semen channel and have early access to the content, priority answers in the comments, and the certainty that you are supporting the continuity of this work. Each contribution of yours is a brick in this collective spiritual construction that is already turning thousands of men around the world. There are times on the journey of a man in which everything seems silent. No response from above, no visible signal. He fast now, resist, and nothing. But this silence is not absence. It is observation. The sky tests the warrior not with rewards, but with silence. The top wants to know if you are here only by blessings or by fidelity. If your discipline depends on feeling something or if it is grounded in conviction. It is in this desert that many give up, but it is precisely there that the invisible eyes watch you the most. Because what you do when no one is seeing is being registered in a dimension you have not yet accessed. Each relapse is seen. Each time you give in to temptation, something is noted. But each resistance is also recorded with equal or greater intensity. There are invisible books being written with your story. Not just your mistakes, but with your hidden victories, those no one has seen. When you deleted a video without watching, when he woke up early and prayed with his heart on fire, when he remained firm as the soul shouted for pleasure, the spirit world notes. And what is written there defines what will be released here. The doors that open, the opportunities that arrive, the wisdom that goes down. But there are portals that only open to the righteous. There are missions that are only given to men who have already proved that they know how to carry weight without corrupting themselves. The highest gifts, prophetic vision, spiritual leadership, natural authority, are not given by chance. They are activated, and they only activate when man decides, with all his being, to renounce what the world offers in exchange for what heaven keeps for the chosen ones. The renunciation opens the doors. Obedience supports the way. This is not moralism. This is preparation. A king is not crowned while he still behaves as a servant of pleasure. A priest does not receive anointing if he still negotiates with sin. The man who wants to touch the eternal needs to go through proof of constancy. And heaven, in his wisdom, waits, silently, watching, testing, until the man proves that he is ready to carry something that only the righteous can sustain, because the call is too big for impure hands, and the fire that comes only goes down on altars that don't give in. When a man overcomes silent sin, he does not only become free, he becomes dangerous, not in the worldly sense of the word, but dangerous for the systems that fed their fall. Because a man who broke his chains becomes a lit torch in darkness. He carries the weight of spiritual leadership, not for choice, but consequently. His own existence starts to bother. Where it enters, the atmosphere changes. The weak feel ashamed. The lost feel hope. The thirsty are thirsty for something they didn't even know existed, because his presence reveals, by contrast, what the others have not yet awakened. This authority is not born of titles or diplomas, born of overdue suffering, of the flesh that was burned in the fire of the discipline, from the soul that has learned to silence, to resist, to remain. And the more internal battles he won, the stronger his word, because it's no longer an opinion, it's a sword. It is no longer advice, it is a call. His voice carries a weight that only those who have already descended to hell of addiction and have returned can issue. Each phrase its reverberation as a warning, as light, as called, and those who are still arrested hear and feel. But perhaps the most sacred of all is what the eyes do not see. The look. The man who won now emitting invisible codes only with his presence. He no longer needs to talk much. The brightness of the eyes, the firmness of the posture, the silence loaded with spiritual energy, all this communicates. He becomes, without realizing it, a compass for other men. It does not teach by imposition, but by witness. Your life becomes a sign. Your presence purifies. It enters environments and distractions lose strength. The temptations retract. The looks deviate, but with respect, because there is something in it that remembers others, that there is still a higher way. And this man, who was once just one in the crowd, is now seen by heaven as a sentry, a guardian, a living sign that victory is possible. He no longer lives for himself, lives as an altar in motion, as an arrow pointed to the top, as an incarnate answer to those who are still praying for liberation. He does not speak of overcoming, he is overcoming, and your example will be, for many, the only preaching they will really hear. When sin is torn by the root and man rebuilds over the rock of renunciation, a new life begins, and it looks like nothing to what came before. It's not just an improved version of yourself, it's another being, another spirit, another vibration. He awakens at 4 a.m. without alarm clock, not out of obligation, but because there is a fire burning inside. The discipline no longer weighs, it pulsates. The mind no longer seeks comfort, but battle. The soul no longer runs away from pain, it seeks cut. Time is no longer wasted, it is consecrated. Each morning becomes an altar, each gesture, an offer, each decision, an eternal echo. And then, without searching, the right woman appears. But it no longer arrives as a trial, it arises as an answer, because the man now no longer looks for her, but attracts her with presence. Your high magnetism filters, empty women move away, the chaotics lose interest, and the one that vibrates at the same frequency, firm, silent, sacred, approaches. There is no need for games, seductions, performances. The connection happens because he became king, and queens do not attract for boys. They bow before the natural authority of a man who has already bowed to the sacred. But what most sustains this new life is the mission, what replaces addictions, voids, distractions. Now man lives for something that pleasure could never offer, spiritual immortality. He moves not by rewards, but by legacy. No more pleasure, seeks impact. No longer asks for blessings, becomes blessing. The energy that once drained by the hands now rises upwards. It transmutes into vision, wisdom, towards. This is the man of fire, not because it screams, but because it burns. Not because it imposes itself, but because it ignites. He no longer needs to prove anything. Your own existence is lightning, a torch lit in the darkness. Where he steps, order is born. Where he speaks, silence springs. Where he lives, everything around begins to remember that there is something greater. Because this man didn't come to consume life, he came to consecrate it. And where he passes, the world will never be the same. You can continue living as if nothing is corroding your essence, pretending that emptiness is normal, that apathy is part of adulthood, that this anguish in the bottom of your chest is just tiredness. Or you can accept what your soul already knows. There is a fire erased inside you and it needs to be rekindled. The sin that consumes your energy in silence will not stop on your own. And each time you advance that decision, you deliver one more part of yourself to a system that profits from your fall. The choice is yours, to follow a spectator of the decay itself, or to become the warrior who lifts, breaks, and rebuilds. But no, who refuses the call, sinks. Who accepts, awakens. If this video talked to something you still can't explain, select learning with a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell as a sign that you are ready to continue this sacred journey. And now, watch the next recommended video. It's not just content, it's the next step in your passage right.